Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Keen to get started. On a Friday evening, people are all over the museum, so they'll probably keep coming in. So if you move in towards the edges, from the edges, that would be great. Delighted to start this evening by showing you a film. This film is called Jules Olitski, Modern Master. And I'm sure most of you have had the opportunity at this stage to see our wonderful exhibition, Revelation. And hopefully much has been revealed, but more will be revealed with this film, which was made in 2011 by Andy Reichman and Kate Purdy. It's a special film because it shows us material which hasn't previously been seen, revealing the processes of an artist who consistently challenged himself to make paintings which continued a journey throughout a 60-year career. And we'll have very special guests to talk with you about what you'll see in this film after its 22 minutes, which I assure you will be enthralling. And therefore, I will say no more just now and invite us to turn it on. Thank you. Okay.
The Revelation show is a show of only large-scale, public-scale paintings. It is not a complete retrospective in the sense that we have concentrated not on the links between major series, but on the major series themselves. I think it's going to be a real eye-opener for a lot of people who haven't seen a lot of Olitski's work recently. And of course, the paintings depend so much on being seen. The sheer scale of them, the nuances of the surface, never can be reproduced.
That inspiration fell upon me, like from the gods. So I thought, well, if inspiration comes and I'm asleep, so I better be at my easel, where it works. I work all the time. I think it was in the self-help book. I needed all the help I could get. And there was a passage, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do the thing, and you will have the power. But I thought, yeah, that was the key to inspiration.
I think he's unquestionably one of the great modernist painters, and one of the most potent and original and inventive abstract painters ever. In a sense, he's pushed the limits of abstraction, picking up on all the implications of painters like Matisse, like Monet, and moving them into a language of his own.
And Jules' strength is the strength of personality. That's what comes out in his paintings. It's not to do with the color. There's so much character in the work. You can't describe exactly why it's so powerful, but it is.
Jules really had a touch that was large, actually. It was really great to be able to sustain the image and to be able to sustain the gesture is essentially the gesture or the stroke of genius.
I think that Jules is not so much about being an artist, he's about his art. He's about the creation of it. And his very wise words of expect nothing, do your work, celebrate. He was less about his career and less about what people thought of him and more about pulling out his own best, and that would do for others.
Frankly, I never felt very comfortable ever about talking about subject matter and content, I never quite understood. What did it matter one way or the other? The question is it good? You know, someone looks at an abstract painting and says, well, what does it mean? You know, well, what does anything mean? You'll forgive me, but it's, I think, an apt example. When you love someone, you go to bed with that person, you make love. Do you pause in the middle of it and say, what do you mean? What does it mean?
When Jules said, I got something to show you guys, come on. And we went into his studio and he sprayed a picture. I mean, it was sort of, we didn't realize what was happening in art. We just realized that we got to make a new art. I think Jules wanted to get rid of the drawing, get rid of the shaping. And he said, I would like to make my paintings like a cloud, like something that kind of hangs in the air. It was a revelation. It was an amazing idea. Jules was a gambler, you know. Jules is the best gambler I have ever met. His whole life was taking chances.
You know, I don't know what I was looking for when I went to the studio. I would think I knew what I was looking for. I think I was looking for the familiar. I think I was looking for something that I had finally become comfortable with on the last visit. And I think that the great experience of it was that there was never a sense, anything less than excitement in seeing what was presented, but it was never the way I guessed it was going to turn. I would try to think, well, where is Jules going to go next? What's going to happen in the studio, given what I've seen on past visits? And I couldn't guess, and I'm glad I couldn't.
It was rare that I actually saw him laying paint down, but there were times, and more often, more frequently, it would be, come and see what happened last night. And we go in and see some phenomenon underway, and he loved to talk about the desperation, the awfulness of the condition of a work of art is in at some moment. How that leads to desperate measures. And the desperate measures lead to discovery, and this is where the adventure happens. His experimenting, his playing with all the tools of, you know, brooms and mops and hair dryers and leaf blowers and good God knows what.
I'll start here and see what happens. And just keep going. And then suddenly you stop. And I use a rather primitive mixing gadget. And begin by just pouring it on the canvas. If I've begun with a notion, I want to use a roller and see what will happen with thick paint and a roller so that a certain kind of surface may develop. If I go slowly, it's making for a surface of a kind that I may not have used before, and think what will happen in the process of doing that. I may find I don't like it. And try it out. Here I am in this position, and this has happened as I've pushed the squeegee across. I would find it probably irresistible to wonder, well, what will happen if I pull it back this way? You know, will anything happen? Well, that's happened. And so I have to decide, do I want that or not? Now, a lot of times you put something on, you anticipate what may happen, but I don't really know for certain, because it depends a lot on what something will dry looking like.
I asked him once, what do you do before you begin working? And he said, oh, I get on my knees and I pray. And I said, what do you pray for? And he said, I pray that God will let me get out of my way.
I think we all get in our own way, and we get tripped up with that because we have expectation, and we have even some intimidation of what others are going to think of us for doing what we do. And I think the praying part comes in where we say, let it go, be free, and be available to yourself.
Sometimes this would happen, and I would feel myself taken over. And the feeling is of being lifted almost, or being outside, or out of my own way. And the feeling is that anything you do is the right thing. The work itself is almost making itself, like making its demands, and they must be met. And it just goes. And when I step back afterwards and look at it, I'm surprised.
In other words, not judging, not calculating, but being alert to what is happening, what evolves as you're making the painting. Allowing your intuition, your informed intuition, your experience, your sheer talent to dictate what you're doing rather than some idea about what you're doing. It's what is often referred to as process-based art, as opposed to concept-based art. Concept-based artists believe that you have to know exactly what you're doing ahead of time. A painter like Olitski is not the least bit interested in that. He has no idea what that painting is about until he paints it. And he went to all kinds of lengths to eliminate that kind of preconception from his process. Early on by painting blindfolded, later by using unconventional tools, by working late at night when there was nothing to distract him.
The way he worked was crazy. He worked at night. How can you paint a color picture under fluorescent lights at night? It's a miracle. I have no idea. I'd go visit them sometimes, and Jules would appear about 4 o'clock and have breakfast, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, having worked all night.
It's play, yeah. It's like playing, but it's also very serious and focused, and the more you get into it, in a way, the less you're there.
First thing, I think, in making a work of art is out of this play. In order for it to speak at all, to be any good, you have to make it alive. It's life or death. It's making the work live or it dies as a work of art. As soon as you paint the canvas or shape something, you are holding on to something that you're creating.
Jules was a life force in his work, in his life. He lived to make art. That's what made him alive, and he was tireless.
I happen to believe that there is a creative force. Some people call it in God. I know from my experience in making art. I used to think it was like when I would have that experience, that it was something that we would call inspiration, and that the work would come about out of intuition and imagination, which I think plays a role.
the decisions that are being made like a mile a minute as you're making the work. And that has to come out of experience and a vision of what, the kind of thing I was talking about with the Rembrandt, that sweep that he has of dark and light, and just takes possession of the whole canvas, you know, creates it. And everything in it, you know, is informed by that.
He was looking to challenge himself. He was looking to challenge Matisse. He was looking to challenge his immediate forebears in all of art history. You know, you see that in the work. You see that in the fact that every part of his picture is considered.
Olitski's abstract paintings over the years seem to draw on the whole legacy of Western art history. He was a passionate admirer of Rembrandt, of El Greco. And somehow the rich visual qualities of those paintings, their extraordinary use of dark and light for expressive reasons, find their way into Olitski's abstractions in completely contemporary terms and detached from reference, but with all the associations of reference. It's magic.
From a technical standpoint, you know, sfumato and chiaroscuro, they're in his work. They are just part of that kind of continuum. He constantly was sourcing from the past, and I dare say that the older he got, the clearer the message of any of the old masters became for him. I think that's an inevitable consequence of the kind of engagement that an artist like Jules has.
The art of Western civilization, its origin, begins with the image of the Almighty taking a handful of clay, or was it dust? I don't remember. My wife says it's clay, so we'll go with that. And shaping it into a figure, a man. And then he breathes into this figure, and it's alive.
The hallmark of Jules through the years was some sort of personality that comes through in the pictures. There is something of the intimate and personal, even in the largest pictures, where you get swallowed up, and where, you know, I don't want to turn Jules into a romantic, but I certainly don't think he was trying to take feeling out of the pictures. I think that the paintings are felt. How they're made, what happens, how you can tell that they come from a certain moment because the materials didn't exist before that moment. Ideas dreamed up to bring the pictures together. All of that is part of a tool to just make something that none of us had seen before, and that had a life of its own now, and that stood on its own 2 feet. It's like being in a room with an equal. It's not filling a gap between life and art. It's there, and you're here, and you're both important. The picture makes you feel more important as a person because it's talking to you. You have some relationship with it.
Actually, the viewer of a work of art has to do something, the same thing that an artist does, because the viewer has to suppress himself or kind of put himself naked in front of the work of art. And it's a direct communication between you and the work.
The way that Jules was able to handle it, he was able to get the expression or the gesture that would be configured by your hands, or how you might understand it, and translate it into the whole gesture of the hands and the body, and then ultimately the mind, so that it really worked. And it was a gift for the handling of the materials on a scale that's really not that easy, and is not done. Not able to be done by many people, actually. And I think that that's what made him so close and so important to abstract expressionism, because at its best, abstract expressionism had the ability to magnify its gestures and to magnify its ability to move the materials. And I think that came to a kind of fruition in Jules's painting.
It was Pollock who taught us how to look at late Monet. What Olitski did was to take the notion of the all-over painting, whether it's the surface of the lily pond or the expanse of pores and drips, and translate it into a different material language that was simultaneously all about color, all about paint, and completely disembodied for the eye only.
There's such a depth to Jules's career that makes it more difficult and more challenging to understand the essence of what his career is about.
He never stood still. Like his good friend Anthony Caro, he was constantly responding to things around him, the work of his colleagues, the work of old masters, what was materially available at any given time. I mean, very, very much, very responsive to what was physically possible at any given time.
G.K. Chesterton said, "There is at the back of every artist's mind something like a pattern, a type of architecture. It is a thing like the landscape of his dreams, the landscape of his dreams."
Well, I hope you enjoyed that film. Well, you noted that the co-producer of the film was Lauren Olitski Poster, Lauren is here, Jules Olitski's daughter. And it's a very special occasion for us to have such extraordinary people here this evening. Kristina Olitski, who knew Jules for a very long time, over decades. He passed away in 2007, so somebody who knows him very, very well indeed, and you can ask questions to. And Karen Wilkin, who has been a guiding light in post-war American art studies and created many exhibitions and writes like a bird, beautifully, but from a position of great knowledge. And over the last couple of days, it's been just a joy to have other people who featured in the film here present. David Mervish is here. Put up your hand, David. I recognize him from the film. Anne Friedman was here last night. And Barbara O'Brien, chief curator of the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. Where's Barbara? there. And the Kemper Museum started this exhibition, gathering together Karen and Alison DeLima Green, who's here from the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and E.A. Carmine and Karen, to create really a wonderful publication and a very special exhibition. This is a really wonderfully chosen show, and really no wonder, because the expertise of the people involved, but the fact that they were working with Lauren and with Kristina. So if you ever had an opportunity to try to ask questions of people who might know answers, some of you have, I hope all of you have seen the show, but if you want to address questions, please do now. And I don't know, who'd like to start? Anything you've seen? Yes, Alison.
I'll get it going, since
Good for you.
Kate and I were just asking ourselves, the painting that we see in process, as he's showing us how Olitski paints the painting, did that painting survive?
You're talking about from the early footage from the early 70s. You know, that was the first thing Andy Rexman asked me, which was, do you know what painting this is? And I don't know what painting it is. You know, it's not completed, it's not dry. You know, most of those paintings probably are out in the world somewhere. So I don't know exactly which painting that is.
Can I say something?
Sure.
It probably ended not as that painting. You know, a painting took him a long time, and it went through different stages. He may have put red on top of everything.
Could have changed.
Or it could have changed very dramatically, but you can be sure that if there was canvas on the floor and he was putting paint on it, it became a painting eventually. Believe me, he didn't roll that up and toss it. It became a painting, and that's why some paintings are very thick.
I was interested in this statement in the implied statement in the movie, maybe linking one of the pictures with El Greco, for instance. And I was wondering, was this a link that was made as part of the movie making, or a link that was actually made by Jules himself?
It was definitely made by Jules Olitski himself. Yeah. He had a reproduction of that painting, which was identified at the end of the film. It's in the church. It was called the Assumption. Now it's been decided that it's the Coronation of the Virgin. It's in the church in Toledo. When he went to Toledo, it was mostly to see the burial of Count Orgath, which he was very excited about, but it was the Assumption that deeply, deeply moved him. And as he put it in his usual somewhat tongue-in-cheek way, he decided he would paint that painting. And he said, but it kept coming out like that fellow Olitski. And those are, that was the time of the so-called, as we're calling them, the high Baroque paintings with the big gesture of the mitt and the interference paint, which allowed him to have a kind of, or became for him a kind of equivalent for the unstable color in El Greco. So it's everything he loved about El Greco translated into his own language, but definitely his own connection.
Well, thank you. Can I just make a follow-up comment? I was wondering if you have any information or knowledge whether he was strongly influenced by micrographs or electron micrographs at all. Because I know I'm from a microbiology background, I look at some of these and it's sort of immediate resonance with some of these things that one sees. I just don't know if that was,
My guess is that if you were sitting right here, he'd ask you to define
what you're talking about.
Microscopic in photographs or Microsoft images.
I don't think so. I mean, very often over the years, people have said,
Yeah.
"Oh, it looks like photographs of the moon," or you know, close-up geology or something like that. And I don't think that was an intentional, you know, relationship he was trying to draw.
I don't think there's ever an intentional relationship between something that you can see and what ends up on the painting. The paintings may be full of associations, which are obviously going to be totally different for each one of us, depending on our own experience. But as I think emerged very well from the archival footage, this was a process of discovery. It was of doing the thing and seeing what happens, and making, as Jules says in the film, making decisions every minute about what you keep, what you change, do you keep going on, but not with an idea of making something that looks in a particular way. That is, it looks like what you end up with. And he was the one, what he wanted above all was to surprise himself.
Were there colors that came out that were more popular or like he was kept being drawn to a color palette more than one?
I mean, I want to like finish this, but I'm going to start by just saying that I think that certainly during a period of days or weeks or months, he might really investigate a particular color for a really long period of time, and then maybe move to another color. And I think Kristina might speak very much like some of the colors he was choosing in the last years. My take was there was a yellow that started appearing that I hadn't seen before, for instance. But you can't say that that yellow was there 10 years earlier. So like every other thing that he did, he never stopped, you know, he never stayed still. There might be things that would come back over time, but they always came back in a fresh way.
And part of it is what was going on with paint technology. Right. Because there's this extraordinary paint company called Golden's Paint, started by Sam Golden, who was a chemist for Beaucourt Paint, who was a major supplier for contemporary artists, one of the first acrylic producers. And then Golden's went out on its own. It is now run by Sam's son, Mark. And this is a company that has always worked very closely with artists. They'll come up with some things, they give it to the artist and say, try this, see if you like it. The artist will say, you know what I really wish is a kind of gel that has really saturated color. And we have artists who are sitting here right now who are responsible for that being on the market right now. So anything that the artist could come up with, the Goldens try to answer the artist's needs. And so the technology, the possibilities of acrylic paint have evolved extraordinarily. You can make it do almost anything, in part because of what the artist said they wanted. So if this yellow suddenly appeared, if they came up with a new chemical formulation of a yellow that hadn't happened before, you can be sure that Jules was going to latch onto it. And the Goldens probably sent some to him and said, try it out. You know?
I was a studio assistant for a long time, and I mixed thousands of gallons of paint. Thousands.
You made pastels too.
Yeah, that's something else. That's from the landscapes. But I just, and he used enormous quantities of paint. You know, people will buy paint by the tubes. We would order paint by, you know, we would order 40 gallons of paint. We're not talking, we're talking a Chevy. And he would say to me, he would leave me notes because he worked at night and I slept at night. I would get up in the morning and he would leave me a note and say, mix me about 20 gallons of pinks, all different kinds of pinks. Pink is the hardest color to mix. It's so difficult to get a good, clean pink. using red or whatever, the blue, whatever the hell you used. It's so hard to get pink. But I would do it. And then I would label them, and the tops would be sort of loose. And when he went to work that night, he would add, he would make his own mix sometimes. He would take that gallon and pour some in another gallon container, half of it, and add something to it. But he used them as bases. Once he asked me to make him 20 blues. That was easy, from dark to light. But they couldn't be replaced. I mean, how do you know how you made that blue? I threw in some green, I threw in some this, I threw in some, that's how I would mix them. And I used that mixer. So he didn't really plan it, he just used it. And he would change the colors if he didn't like a color, or he would change it while he was working on it by mixing other colors with a gloved hand in it on the canvas. That's all I think.
Did he only use raw canvas, or if so, why?
We primed the canvas. In the 60s, he used raw canvas, but not in the 70s. That was all primed. In the 80s, everything was primed.
And stretched?
He never unprimed because it would shrink.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by primed. It wasn't like he was using gesso, which is a traditional way of priming a painting. He would prime a painting with paint. I mean, it might be paint mixed with gesso, especially in the last 20 years or so. He sometimes would use a black gesso as a ground, but like Chris is saying with the pink, he went through his period of pink grounds, and he wanted purple grounds, and
which is the color.
And so it was the gesso mixed in with a pigment, so it wasn't what you would traditionally think of as a primed canvas, but the early paintings were definitely all raw canvas.
They were stained.
The stain.
The paint is really
Not
soaked
the
into
sprays.
it.
Sprays were just.
I don't think so.
Well, there's something there. There's something there under,
yeah.
but not traditional.
But when I was there,
traditional.
from my time on, everything was everything. Bricks, gesso, everything on the floor. Everything was gesso. Sometimes with
we can
colors.
argue a lot.
No, I'm serious. Nothing was ever on the because
I think it's how you define gesso in this case.
I think also that this is demonstrating that this is an artist who worked by himself, obviously, so there's not a lot of cohorts that can call in assistants.
Yes, there is.
Kristina was,
I mean, he didn't go in and prepare a canvas before he started, and I did.
No, I don't mean by that. I mean, like, but the way artists have a lot of studio assistants or young artists working with them.
He wouldn't let anyone in the studio.
I have a question. When you had the spray paintings, there was one in the exhibit that is blue, and then it has pink, and it has green, and they're wonderful. My question is now did he do the solid color and then spray the pink and green on top, or was it pink first, then?
Good luck figuring that one
out. You could ask him that, and I don't think
there was at one point he did talk to me about using 2 spray guns at once. Like a Western cowboy. But something might go down, he might add something. I mean, this is from looking at the paintings and also talking to him a bit. And I'm sure you can correct me, but it wasn't systematic. Something he put down something, and this was in the film clip. Put down something, see what it looks like. Okay, now what happens if I do this? Well, this might be the pink, but then the blue might come back in, or some other blue might come back in. It wasn't preconceived. It was, because I keep saying, it was a response to what was in front of him, and he would use whatever came to hand. mean, you can see some things are masked off, some things are definitely, this had to happen first because this is sprayed on top of it. That's about as much as you can say.
Did you ever sand the picture at all?
Well, you know, it sort of depends. A lot of those paintings are fairly thick, and that is because of the kinds of mediums he was using. And they take a little while to solidify, so you can't just stand it right up and look at it. It's going to slide off. So,
sand.
oh, sand.
Sand.
Is that what you said? I'm sorry, I have terrible hearing. Did he sand them? Not that I'm aware of.
I've never seen him sand anything.
Somebody was standing looking and they were sure that they saw sand marks.
Yeah, I never saw him sand. I've seen him spray paint off the canvas.
This would have been on the spray stick.
She might be asking add sand. There's a.
Oh, that, yes.
No, I didn't ask.
Oh, sorry.
Sand. It could have been squeegee marks.
Yeah, it would be more likely. But not with the spray painting, no. No, there was no sanding or squeegeeing with the spray paintings.
And that was pretty delicate.
It's all how he was manipulating the spray guns.
Now, if you were asking about Kenneth Nolan, he actually did use an electric sander on some of his paintings to create these miraculous surfaces, but not Jules.
Can I ask, given that the show has been selected and worked on by E.A. Carmine and you, Alison, and Karen, and with the Olitski family, and it's gone on a journey.
With Lauren. I didn't do anything. Believe me.
With Lauren and Kristina.
No, I was useless.
It's a feisty lot. But to get to my point, given that it's been a tour, and it's now been in 3 venues, and you know the work so intimately, and it's such a joy, I'm sure, I mean, I can see it in you. What have people said that has confirmed things that you felt, and what have people said that has surprised you on the journey of the 3 venues so far?
Yikes. Well, it's not so much what people have said. What has been utterly thrilling is to watch people looking at the paintings. And that was one of the wonderful things about last night. They are paintings that take time. I mean, physically, at least my rods and cones have to adjust, and I assume most people's vision works that way. The most graphic example of that would be the big black painting, Guzler, which when you first look at is a big black painting. And as those of you who spent some time looking at it know, the more you look at it, the more the surface starts to become this almost transparent gathering of droplets, and then there's this kind of purple red that kind of pulses out of it, and you can't believe you're seeing what you're seeing because you were sure it wasn't there before. So there's slow paintings, and to watch people spending the time looking at them and looking at one from the other and really getting how individual each one of these is has been thrilling. Anyone say anything to you?
People don't say anything to your daughter. Except how much they enjoy it, you know. I mean, I think it's a different ear that I get. But I also, I mean, I'm just grateful to see people engaging with the work and having it out in the world and people getting an opportunity to experience it. You know, it's a joy. It's a joy. Art is about communication, and my dad was very much you know, he lived a fairly reclusive life, but that was important to him that the paintings communicated with all of us, and that's what's happening, and to see it traveling here and there, and to see people really looking at the work, it's just, I'm like just having a ball. I'm having a ball with it.
Just the one thing I want to say is the show where the Love and Disregard paintings were in the last room in the show. Many people
men, maybe 3, maybe 4 people came up to me and said, these paintings look like they were painted by a 22-year-old. And that was sort of, it's true, and it was exciting. Because he was able to do that in his work. He was able to make age disappear. Not experience, but age, and not intelligence. He was very intelligent, but he could really, and those things, when people said things like that, it made it become real.
The energy of a 22-year-old and the experience of an 80-year-old.
Yes, it's something like, and the intelligence of an 80-year-old. He also, I'll tell you, the one person who said things about his work more than anybody else was him. He would sleep at night, and during the day. I would sleep at night. I would get up at 6, 6:30, 7 o'clock. He'd be coming in from work. And he'd come in, and he'd say something like, I think I made the worst painting in the world. It might be the best, but I think it's the worst. So I would say, we lived on an island during the summer, and it was like 300 feet, right, between the buildings, the house and the studio. And I would say, well, let's go over and look at it. 6:30, 7 in the morning, so we'd grab coffees and we'd go over and we'd look at it. It was that sense of immediacy and excitement that I can't forget, and I miss terribly. I mean, he was the one who told me the most. He couldn't really say it about himself because he was out of himself. He didn't feel, incidentally, like he painted the pictures. He felt like something else did. He really did. He wasn't precious at all about his, oh my God, he was the least precious person. And he wasn't, well, precious is the right word, I won't go. Once, when we were first together, I walked through the studio and he was painting solely in the floor. Later on, he would paint on these big cutting tables from a dress factory. You know, they're high and they're big, and, you know, and he wouldn't have to bend down. He was 83 years old. I mean, come on. I'm walking through a studio. The paintings are on the floor, and I walk right in the middle of the painting. Oh, wet. Oh my God. Did I ever tell you that? Oh my God, I was out of my mind. I didn't know what it said. I went in, I told him like a confessional, and he said, oh, let's go look at it. Somebody like this, don't give him anything. I mean, I was his statement. And he said, let's go look at it. And we looked at it, and he said, you may have improved it. It was just grace on his part, because he cut the painting in half, and he worked on them and made 2 separate paintings. But he was the one who told me the most. I mean, very few people ever said to me, I don't know if it's any good, but I know what I like. Oh, make me want to get my 2x4 out when I heard that. But he was something. Here.
Yeah.
What did he say about working under artificial light? I thought I noticed in one scene that the ceiling lights in the studio were fluorescent.
Daylight fluorescent.
Daylight fluorescent.
He painted in fluorescent light. Do you think you're looking at paintings in a museum under natural light?
In some places you are now.
In some, but in most places you're looking under fluorescent or electric.
And everybody had them, and there was supposed to be a balance between warm and cool, and there were some that were called daylight, and everybody was always experimenting with what was supposed to be the best.
Yeah, we used all that.
Yeah.
But wasn't it frustrating?
No. I mean, you know, the one thing about my dad, I don't think he ever cared about, like, any of it. It was like, he wanted to work, he would work with whatever was in front of him. If he didn't happen to be in his studio and he was traveling or something, he would grab, you know, whatever paper was in a hotel room, and he, you
Make
know,
a drawing.
but it could be anything that was anywhere. He didn't care about. He wasn't precious about the art, and he wasn't precious about how he got to where he got. You know, he was grateful that he had a career that was successful enough to be able to buy the 40 gallons of one color at a time. But for the most part, he didn't care what lights were. It was whatever anybody set up for him. As long as they left him alone, he would use whatever was there. He would make it work. And you know, if he didn't like it, he'd put it down and he'd pick up something else. I don't think he was aware at all what kind of lights were on in the studio. It was whatever was in his head.
But he needed his music.
Yeah, he did like his music.
What kind? He was an opera buff.
Or rock and roll, or...
He liked, no, not just rock and roll. He was an opera buff. He really was an opera buff. And he loved certain symphonies, loved Mozart, loved Bach, oh God. And he loved Little Richard. And he loved Prince. And he thought Prince was one of the great musicians of our time. Not great classical musician, but one of the great musicians. Really, really smart. And he had a very good ear. When he was a young man, he used to babysit Beverly Sills. Her name was Beverly Silverman. They lived in this tenement in Brooklyn. And she was singing, this was in the late 30s, in the Major Bowes.
I'm sure.
Whatever the hell that was, you know, I was just born then. And he would take her and bring her home. And they stayed friends always. It was very sweet.
There was a question.
I had a question. I saw in the film that he had a cigar in his hand, had a cigarette in his hand. Were ashes involved in the painting? Did he constantly smoke a cigar while he was painting?
He stopped in '83.
Okay.
But yes, I'm sure there were, and the cat was there, there's cat hair. You know, I remember there was one time where he kept reworking this one painting over and over and over again, and the flies kept getting in there.
Yeah.
And he'd try to pick the damn flies out, and then he'd go and put more glop down, and then more flies would come in. And there's all kinds of things in his paintings.
The cat who appears in one of the images, a very, very fine Himalayan called Caro, not, it turns out, in honor of Anthony Caro, but Caro like Caro Mio, although Jules said he never told Tony that. But I'm sure Jules told you that Caro would come into the studio and look at the paintings, and if the painting was not any good, Caro would turn his back.
He also sang.
Yes,
with the opera.
Yes,
Cat.
he was a terrific. He was a terrific cat. He's the one who unbuttoned my shirt.
Yes, it's a very clever cat.
And helpful.
Not in this case.
Depends on whose side he was on.
My point of view,
not yours.
Kristina, I'm wondering, what was...
That is a hand tag.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. There's a painting of his that I haven't seen in over 40 years, and I've forgotten what it looks like, but the title I'll never forget, and I'm wondering if you could tell me where it might be now. The name of the painting is Thigh Smoke.
Oh, that's...
Oh, yeah. That belonged to Clem, didn't it?
It was done in the 60s, I think.
Yeah,
oh, it was done in the 60s.
Yeah, definitely in the 60s. And for a while it was on loan to a museum that I worked at. I think it belonged to Clement Greenberg.
David, do you know?
David? That
That's
it didn't
a
belong to Clement Greenberg.
It's a beautiful painting.
If it's the painting I'm thinking of, it may be at the Portland, Oregon Museum, which has a lot of works that used to belong to Clement Greenberg.
Yeah, you can look that up.
Yeah.
Did you have a question, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, just related to dramatic smoking, did giving up drink have an impact on the work?
Yes.
How?
He had much more energy. He worked more.
Did what have an impact on the work?
He stopped drinking.
Oh, okay.
And he drank. He had a hollow leg. And he couldn't anymore, it would have killed him. And he had to stop, and he did in 1984. And he became much more energetic and more happy. You know, I think that was the biggest change. He became happy with his work and happy with his life. I mean, alcohol can really depress you. It depressed him. And it was incredible, the change. It was an enormous change in him. And he had more energy.
The summer of '84, when he stopped drinking, I would say 80% of the paintings he did that year were yellow and gold. Wow. Whatever that means.
He did love yellow.
He did love yellow.
And he loved diarrhea-light yellow, which is traffic yellow. Because that yellow pops. You can put that yellow on any other color and it goes. It's an incredible color. It's sort of ugly by itself, but it's an incredible color used with other things.
And related to that, then, how do you account for, I mean, as you walk through the exhibition, those last two rooms are just phenomenal in their energy. I mean, it's extraordinary, I mean, the physicality of it. And what, you know, I mean, this is a very strong man who can do that for a start. But how do you sort of, how do you, maybe you, Karen, how do you talk about the journey from flat and stained to where it ends up pooled?
Well, of course, it's also coming full circle because some of the first mature paintings that Jules made were the so-called spackle paintings, which are thick. They tend to have not a lot of color, tend to be earth color. Some are almost monochromatic, a little bit of red sometimes. Unfortunately, we couldn't have any in the show because they're very, very fragile. They have very thick and rather brittle surfaces. But that kind of density and material presence was there right from the start. So in a sense, he's come back to his origins, just as the discs are not unrelated to the, what have we called the embraced circle paintings with which the show begins. It's a part of this exploration of possibilities, you know, that Tony Caro once said, and I quote him all the time on this, it was at a group, with a group of young sculptors who were very busy laying down rules about what sculpture could be and couldn't be, and if it's going to be this, if it's going to be new, it can't be that. And Tony listened very patiently. He said, you know, the pendulum can be all the way over here, or all the way over here, or anywhere in between. And I think that was Jules's relationship to possibilities. It could be anywhere in between. But the last paintings for me are the last room for me is just the perfect embodiment of what art historians call late style. And it's not given to all artists to have a late style. The great ones who live a long time often do. You know, Titian did, Rembrandt did, Matisse certainly did, Monet certainly did. And I would put Jules in that company, and Tony Caro as well, because it's this accumulated experience that you talked about, an intelligence, and a sense of, I don't care, you know, I'm going to do it. And as he said, I'm going to risk making the worst painting in the world because it might turn out to be the best painting in the world. So all of the conventional criteria really don't apply to those late paintings. And they're marvelous because of it.
I think I see some sleepy people in this room.
You see what? Anybody got any more questions? The museum is open until 10 o'clock, so you can still go to the exhibition, right?
Cool.
Yeah. So, any last questions? No? Yes, one?
You're an artist also?
I am, yeah. One of two. Yeah.
You paint?
I do as well. Did you say, do I find it daunting? Oh, you bet I do. Yes, I do. But quite honestly, I think anybody of my generation who's trying to paint has to challenge themselves with what my father's already accomplished. It's daunting for anyone. But yes, it's daunting for me.
Can I just ask one quick thing? I've always wondered, if you have a bad review or a good review, in his case, did he actually read the reviews? And if so, would a bad review actually be better in terms of stimulating work than a good review?
That's really a good point. He reveled in bad reviews, and he would collect them. He would keep them in a file. I mean, he loved them. Good reviews he found in general rather banal. But bad reviews he enjoyed. Good art writing, on the other hand, if it was good, and that's very rare, he really appreciated it. And it's very hard to write about a visual language. How can you use a verbal language to write about something, a visual language? They are languages. When he was a teenager, during the New York World's Fair, what was it, 39? Okay, he would have been 17. And at that time, well, he went to the World's Fair, and then this Mexican muralist, Orozco was it, came to New York and was staying at the St. Regis Hotel. And Jules, being full of himself at 17, you're all stupid at 17, calls there and makes an appointment. He asks Orozco if he can see him. Could he make an appointment with him? And this Mexican said yes. And Jules goes up there, and he sits in the lobby with this famed artist. And he said, "Don't you find modern art disgusting? Picasso and Matisse and all these people, what they're doing, don't you think it's silly?" And Orozco looked at him and said, "Do you speak Greek?" Jules said, "No." And he said, looked at him for a minute, and he said, "Well, a lot of people do. Art's a language, it's a visual language, and you better start looking and learning it." And that changed Jules' life from then on. It was one of those rites of passages for him to recognize what art was really about. You know, I think that's a wonderful story I wanted to share.
Well, I think with that incredibly wonderful story, I'd like to thank Kristina Olitski, Lauren Olitski, and curator Karen Wilkin. This has been a very special occasion, I think a very privileged occasion for us all, and especially to now know that we've got several months to enjoy the great work that's in our candidate gallery. And I thank you all for being here. Take the stories and take the information that you've learned tonight and pass it on, and bring many people to this show over the next couple of months. Can I invite you to give our guests a warm round of applause?